repositioning myself from being, the guy in the CEO founder seat to instead being his wingman. I have more value to add, and I can have much more impact in the world if I'm the 2IC. I'm the co-pilot now. I'm the guy who reads the maps, the numbers, the financial statements, and tells the CEO and founder where we should be steering this ship.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, where we try to crack the code on growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Ormans, and on today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of building a consulting business. Now, today's podcast is sponsored by the incredible team at Virtual Causeway. Traditional demand gen is breaking for a lot of teams that we talk to on the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast. Virtual Causeway helps fix that by shifting from demand creation to demand positioning. Instead of chasing form fills, they engineer where and how your brand appears when buyers research through AI tools and even through peer networks. The result? Fewer cold motions, more high-intent conversations, and revenue teams spending time with people who actually want to buy. You can check them out at virtualcauseway.com. Oh, and don't forget to mention the show for a special rate. Now, my guest today is the founder, CFO of Future Ready, Nate Littlewood. Nate started his career as an engineer, where he was trained to think in systems, constraints, and real-world economics. He moved to Wall Street, where he became a top-ranked equity analyst covering metals and mining. His job was to evaluate companies, forecast performance, and tell the story behind the numbers, not what leadership hoped would happen, but what the data said was going to happen. But instead of staying in finance, Nate did something most analysts never do. He stepped into the arena. He co-founded and bootstrapped Urban Leaf, which is a sustainable e-commerce brand, scaling it from a Kickstarter campaign into a 7-figure business. Now, today, he's the founder and Future Ready CFO at Future Ready CFO, where he helps e-commerce and consumer packaged good founders grow profitably and regain control of their financial story. Now, Nate sat in the boardrooms of Wall Street. He's felt the 2 a.m. founder stress. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, if my research is correct, he did van life. And that was in 2019, before van life was cool. Nate, welcome to the podcast, sir. And thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Carl. Appreciate the intro. And from what I can tell, very well researched. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So to kick us off, can you give the audience a little context about your world? What industries or verticals do you work with? What are the selling motions? What size companies do you work with?
Yeah, so I am a fractional CFO. The word fractional really just means that I am spread across a number of different companies or brands. The reason for that is that the clients and businesses that I work with are not really at the stage yet where they need someone like me full time. So, I give a little bit of my time every week to, a handful of different clients. As you mentioned, I'm a CFO, so I'm helping them with finance, numbers related stuff. But really, I guess to sum it up, and at the core of what I'm trying to help these people with, is taking them from a state of chaos and confusion when it comes to their numbers to one of clarity and confidence. And, implicit in that journey that we go on is basically showing these CEOs and founders how to essentially leverage finance to incorporate into their strategy and business decisions to ultimately, grow more successfully, more profitably, and at the end of the day, just help them sleep better at night, really. I focus specifically on e-commerce and consumer products businesses. I guess what these companies all have in common is that they're all in the business of either purchasing, manufacturing, holding, and then distributing inventory, right? So these are all physical goods companies, which means that there's a whole myriad of financing and investing related considerations around, the holding of that inventory. There's some, accounting unusualities about it, or peculiarities, I should say, about it. And that's the space I play in. There's generally 2 main reasons why people will come looking for someone like me. Number one is they have started to grow tired or frustrated with the poor correlation between the time and effort that they're investing in the business and the financial outcomes that they're achieving. And that could be materializing in the form of they're not paying themselves enough, or maybe they're not paying themselves consistently because they're prioritizing other things from a cash flow perspective. Or it could be that they're just working hard as ever and generating millions of dollars worth of revenue, but none of it seems to be accumulating in the bank account at the end of each month. And they're like, WTF, like, what's the point of all this if, none of it's making its way into my pockets? The other big reason that people work with someone like me is really to address overwhelm and being stuck with too many decisions or choices. So during my onboarding process, I will commonly have a conversation with my founders about, hey, what are your priorities? What are you working on at the moment? And it's usual during these conversations, Carl, that I'll get a list of, 20 or 30 different things. And at some point I have to politely say, listen, if you tell me you've got 20 or 30 different priorities, then what I'm hearing is that you've actually got none, because no one can focus on that many things. And part of what I do is help them figure out what are the 2 or 3 things that they really need to be focused on in order to achieve whatever financial goals that they may have, either as a business or an individual.
Well, if you can't tell, Nate's got lots of things to handle, and you can see that finances, it's a pretty simple world. No, it's not at all. There's so many moving pieces. So working with somebody like Nate, obviously be great. But so let's transition into how we got here. So how we got to the topic today is I asked Nate, I said, hey, what's it like? I ask everybody, what's a successful revenue initiative you ever led? Or what's the most challenging revenue initiative you either solved or are currently solving? And we, with a little bit of a back and forth and a good conversation, we got to the topic of like building a business, and more specifically building a consulting business. So if we could maybe start the conversation this way, you walked away from a pretty high status Wall Street role and you said, hey, I'm going to go build my own thing. What was the hardest part of shifting from being the expert inside of a massively large company to all of a sudden it being you and you selling yourself as a product?
Yeah, interesting question. I guess there's a few significant chapters there, and evolutions in my thinking and thought process that are worth maybe touching on. So the first one was leaving Wall Street. I had been there about a decade. I had a global career by this point. I was getting paid pretty well, but I had this kind of growing discontent in terms of job satisfaction. Like, there was a voice in the back of my head saying, hey, you don't really belong here. This isn't really that well aligned with your values and who you want to be as a person. But I had the golden handcuffs on, and I just stuck with it for, frankly, probably longer than I should have. But the process of leaving that world and stepping out into the entrepreneurial world, I like describing it to people as if it's like you're at the top of this grassy knoll, it's lush, there's food, there's plenty to eat, and you just jump off the top of the cliff. And initially, it's absolutely freaking terrifying. Like, you're hurtling toward the ground, and I felt sick. There were periods where I literally felt sick with just fear and uncertainty, and like I didn't know what was going to happen, or how I was going to land, or where I was going to land. But after a little while, what happens is your parachute comes out. And when your parachute comes out, instead of staring straight at the ground, you can kind of lift your head up and start to look around to the horizon. And as I did that, I was like, wow, there's actually like a whole world over there that I'd never noticed before. There's actually all these people over this direction that are doing really cool things that I've never seen done before. And it starts to be like a really fun process, as you can just kind of float around and explore these worlds that you were just unaware of before. And I just kind of, was blind to. In the year or two that followed that, that's when I went and started my own e-commerce business. You mentioned Urban Leaf before, and that was really, I guess, a bit of a personal reinvention. I was reinventing who I was as an individual, as a professional, and the contribution that I wanted to leave to the world. And like a lot of founders or entrepreneurially minded people, when they look to start their own businesses initially, like I was drawn to the founder CEO role, and that's what I did for 6 or 7 years. In hindsight, looking back, and it took me many, many years to get to this point, but in hindsight, I've now come to realize that I do not actually belong in the founder CEO seat. There are parts of that job that I enjoyed and I think I was really good at, but there's also a lot of parts of that role which I don't think I was good at, and I kind of avoided because I really didn't, I I just didn't enjoy doing them. And my subsequent evolution from a CEO founder to now in a fractional CFO is essentially about repositioning myself from being, the guy in the CEO founder seat to instead being his wingman. So I have more value to add and I can have much more impact in the world if I'm the 2IC. I'm the co-pilot now. I'm the guy who reads the maps, the numbers, the financial statements, and tells the CEO and founder where we should be steering this ship. And what I've come to realize is that that role is a much better call on my skills, competencies, and the stuff I'm really good at. And the impact and footprint that I can have is also far larger, because rather than only being involved with one business before, i.e. my own, I can now be involved in many businesses. And so I'm not only focused on the stuff that I'm genuinely good at and can do well, but I can, inject that value into many more companies than what I was doing before. Does that make sense?
It totally does. There's definitely the aha question that I was writing down as you were talking is this. And maybe I'm sort of thinking of others and even a little bit about myself, but you go from, for sake of conversation, a stable position to going and saying, you know what, I want to try to do something for my own. And when you have that idea for yourself, like the Urban Leaf one, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you wanted to be a chef at one point, but you didn't want to do all the crazy hours. Maybe there's a connection there, but you went to start your own thing. When you start your own thing, it's your idea, you're going to take it on. But as you got into the role, like you meant, like you said, hey, like that seat wasn't for me. How do you determine, or what would you advise somebody on if they're going into that role, being like, hey, look, this is the role that you're supposed to be, and you're not supposed to be the one that you're in? Or maybe if I flip it a different way to say, what was it for you that said, you know what, I don't want to be a CEO. I'm actually better as a CFO. What was the lead up to that for you?
Good question. I guess it wasn't any one thing, but there was a few clues spread out over a number of years. So the first clue was just looking at how I ran the business as a founder CEO, right? Like I just spent 10 years on Wall Street. I was basically, building and eating financial models for breakfast. Like, I could build Excel models and, do fancy equations in my sleep, right? So all of the analytical side, I basically had my own inventory management system and an ERP system, all built in spreadsheets. We had insane amount of forecasting in terms of sales and volumes of every single SKU, a very, very fancy, complicated financial model, which, frankly, I don't think many 8 or 9 figure brands would have had. And, we were just a small startup at the time. So, I really, really over indexed on all that sort of stuff. And I really enjoyed doing that. But at the same time, when you're the founder of a consumer products company, like you also need to care about things like branding and, your Meta ads account and, marketing campaigns and email newsletters and all of this stuff. And I just never got into that. Like I enjoyed kind of learning about it for a day or two. I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. Like, that's it. But I remember I signed up for this course at one point, which was basically, teaching you how to manage or at least oversee a Facebook ads account. And, they have all these systems and processes, and I watched all the videos, completed the course. I pulled out of that and quit after a week. I was like, no, I cannot do this shit. Like this is going to freaking kill me. No, this is just not me. And, caring about brand building and marketing and promotion for a consumer products founder is a freaking important part of the job. And I kind of looked at that and was like, I just don't like this. It doesn't excite me. It does. It's something that I procrastinated on. I always put off. When I did have, reluctantly spend time on it, I never really enjoyed it. So that was clue number one. Clue number two was a little, I guess it's maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. I started mentoring with an accelerator program located here in New York. It's called Food Future Co. And I came in just part of the mentor bench, but very quickly became the lead mentor for the entire program. So I was working with all of these different founders and essentially helping them get unstuck in their business and remove roadblocks and whatever obstacles they had from, progressing things. And I'd never really thought of myself as a coach or mentor up until this point. But through this experience, I was like, this is actually quite fun. I enjoy this. And I never really self-identified as someone who would do this sort of thing, but I kind of surprised myself, and they seem to appreciate having me around. So I was like, okay, that's an interesting data point. So when I kind of sat back and thought about this, I was like, all right, I understand finance and numbers. I've done that for a decade. I understand what it's like to be a CEO and founder of one of these businesses. And quite frankly, Carl, I basically Venn diagrammed my way into this. I just took those two circles, overlapped them, said, okay, what's at the intersection that involves a little bit of mentoring? I've heard about this fractional CFOing thing. Like, sounds like it could be interesting to me. So I just started exploring it. But to be honest, for the first year or two, I dealt with huge amounts of imposter syndrome, because I was like, I've never been a freaking CFO in my life. Like, who am I to be selling CFO services when I've freaking never been a CFO for anyone before? I've never had that title. But then I thought about it. I was like, okay, I might not have had that title, but that was essentially what I was doing in my own company. Like, I had the CEO title, but I was basically, acting as the CFO in my own business for, 6 or 7 years. And, I've also kind of evolved my positioning a little bit, and I'm now much clearer on my value proposition and how I differentiate myself from other CFO types. And thankfully, I struggle a lot less with imposter syndrome than I did. But that's kind of the story of how we got here, I guess.
Interesting. I find the world of the executive suite is really interesting in my opinion. There was a gentleman that I got to work with early in my career. He was the former CFO at Ford. And then when I met him, he was the CFO at Tower Automotive, which rebranded, and then he became the CEO. And there seems to be that if you have really strong financial understanding of a business, taking that next step and taking that CEO seat seems like there's a typical correlation path to get there. And maybe it is because of all the financial acumen and all the things you're talking about. Now, the flip side of what you were just saying is like not having that seat as a founder CEO, we all have skill sets. Right. And so like, what are the things that you don't like, you're going to put off? You're going to try to learn, but then you're going to put off because somebody that's effectively why you start to hire people. Say, look, I don't want to do the meta ads like these Google. I understand the value, but I can't, my skill set isn't there for them. So I can certainly sort of correlate there. Now, do you see now that you're in this role and you're going into it, you've transitioned, you've built your own business, you've done all the coaching and the mentoring. How often are you having this conversation with the people that you're mentoring of like, hey, you know what? I know you founded the business, but you're in the wrong role. Do you have that often, or is that a common conversation?
Yes, it comes up quite a bit. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I also run a podcast, and in fact, I had a founder on not so long ago to talk about this exact question. Sorry, not a founder, but a CEO. So a woman who'd been brought in to an early stage company to be the CEO. And part of what sparked my interest in having that conversation is I'd very recently had conversations with a couple of my clients who are CEO/founders. and they've been asking themselves this very question, like, do I belong here? Is this really me? Am I the right person to be, running this business? And to clarify, a lot of the clients that I work with, or brands that I work with, they're generally post product market fit, right? We're beyond the, hey, this is an interesting idea phase. Like, we've actually got some traction. We're probably doing at least 2 or 3 million in revenue. Hopefully profitable, or at least on a very short pathway to profitability. But the step we're trying to take here is to go from that into building a real company. And a real company, for this purpose of this definition, has got a fully fledged org chart, right? We've got all the suites filled. We've got systems, we've got processes, we've got kind of standardized ways of doing things, and we can start making decisions in a structured and systemizable and repeatable way. So a lot of my founders are kind of at the beginning of crossing that chasm, or in the process of trying to do it. And so a lot of the decisions that I'm helping them think through are like, okay, how are we going to build out this team? Like, what is the most responsible way to do that? Should we have a CMO? Should we have an agency? Should we be doing self-fulfillment? Should we be working with a 3PL? Like, how do we need to actually build this business? And each one of these has got, its own risk reward, pros and cons. But a question that, comes up very commonly is, who should be the CEO? Who's actually the person running this? And how far are you, the founder, either willing or capable of taking it? And the answer to that question is going to be, different for everyone. I don't know that there's any set formula, and I think it's a sort of decision that one could, dwell on for months, if not years, and not necessarily come to the right answer. But I think when a lot of people can just feel it in their stomach and say, like, this is not me. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm the product person. I'm the innovator. I'm the designer. I'm the customer person. Like, I need to be in that sort of role. And we have conversations all the time about, growing org charts and the evolution of the team.
It is an interesting one, I think, and it would be a lot of fun to just specifically hone in on this topic. And now I have another podcast to go listen to. I do know you had your own podcast, but I did not see that episode. So I'll have to go into it, because it is a question, right? Oh, do you want to be the CEO? Okay, great. And when you do have the CEO, as somebody said, the crown is heavy. So there's a lot of things that come on your plate. And do you want to handle all those things? So anyway, sorry, we're a little bit off topic, and I want to make sure we come back to it, because the whole conversation around fractional, and by the way, thank you for engaging on that, because it is a genuine curiosity for me, is like talking with others and knowing, hey, I started this thing, I'm going to hand it over. It's quote unquote my baby that I want to make sure it goes well. And how are people able to do it? So maybe there's another topic for us another time, Nate. But going into this, going back to our topic, I think you talked a little bit about stepping out and doing your own thing and seeing that Venn diagram. So you saw that was the opportunity for you. But this shift into fractional, there's schools of thought that I've heard. Admittedly, some are like, oh, well, if you're fractional, you must not be that good, which I don't subscribe to. The flip side of the coin is, having somebody like you, I always like to say, you can't buy experience. You just have to experience it. But bringing somebody like you in to help, like, you bring a wealth of experience and a world of experience that they might not actually have. And you can say, look, I've seen the movie. I know how this operates. So now that you have that sense, what was it like building the business for the first time and starting that fractional side and saying, hey, you know what? I am going to go on my own. I'm going to do these things. How did you handle the build phase of just start getting your clients and getting set up? Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah. So for a trained engineer who had spent most of his life in finance, there's probably some stereotypes about me and my personality that are coming to mind, and I'll just confront it head on. Your stereotypes are probably not too far off the truth and accurate. Like, I was not put on earth to be a salesman. All right. And that we could talk about sales and what's happened there maybe as a separate question. But
I did actually have Mark Roberge, who trained engineer
okay.
from MIT, went to
Uh-huh.
HubSpot. Like, he was on the podcast not too long ago, and similar thing. He's
Okay.
like, look, like, I went and I got
Yeah.
my MBA, and then I reverse
Yeah.
engineered how to build a sales and all the processes. So anyways,
Yeah.
I feel like I would like to dig into that one a little bit, but anyways, but you've, very good.
Yeah. Yeah, well, when I was first starting out, I really just prioritized getting reps. So some of the ways I did that is I got on Upwork and I bid extremely competitively. I was competing on, financial model build out jobs with, people in India and, you know, other parts where people are obviously willing to work a lot cheaper than we are here in the US. So I was, doing jobs where my hourly rate would have been, $50 an hour or something. Just because I knew I needed to get the reps. I needed face time in front of other founders and needed to understand how they think and the problems that they want and the concerns that they have and, all that sort of stuff. I also networked my way into a couple of other fractional CFO shops, guys who were a few years ahead of me. They're a bit more established, and I could see that they had the whole sales and marketing thing figured out. And I basically said to them, hey, like, if you ever come in across any clients who are not a great fit for you, maybe I could like subcontract to you. So in financial terms, it basically meant that I was selling my time to them on a wholesale basis and getting, some of the less desirable clients that they didn't really want to do themselves, but rather than just saying no to these people, they would essentially give them to me. So what I was doing is, giving up a large part of, the hourly rate or the, monthly retainer, but at least I didn't have to worry about customer acquisition and marketing and sales, which at that point I certainly had not figured out. Now, once I had done that for a while and gotten some face time with clients, even at, ridiculously low rates, I started to see problems and patterns and understood, how other founders were talking and the way that they were explaining things. And I then started to be, a bit more active in terms of doing my own marketing and trying to get clients directly myself, where obviously, the margin and the math is a lot better. But when I first started doing this, I was very, approaching it as a engineering mind would, which is that I was very focused on the attributes or the features of my offer, which is like, hey, look, I'm going to build this amazing 13-week cash flow, and it's going to have these 6 different sections, and there's going to be this, fancy 3-statement model, and look at this beautiful dashboard I can build for you. Isn't this wonderful? And I was kind of focusing on the widgets and all of their features, but nobody really cared about the widgets and the features. All they, what I now realize is what they really care about is whether or not you know how to solve their problems. They could care less what your dashboard looks like and, how far out your cash flow model goes. Like it's about like, how can you make my life easier and what problems you can solve for me? So when I first started doing this, my conversion rate on sales prospects was like probably less than 5%. It was embarrassingly low. It was so bad that I would feel really pathetic when people would give me a referral, from another CFO firm, for example. They would sometimes send me a referral and say, hey, like, maybe you should talk to Nate. And I would always be dropping the ball. It was like embarrassing. It's like, I can't catch anything. I've got these people throwing things at me, but I can't catch anything. And it was really, really frustrating. But it was a problem I wanted to solve. So I did a lot of reading, a lot of self-education, spoke to a bunch of people, got some help. One of the most impactful pieces of learning I did during that period was reading a book by a woman named, I think it's April Dunford. The title starts with sales pitch, I think. And it's basically like a framework for selling to B2B founders. And what I learned through this is that I had been kind of assuming up until this point that my potential customers knew how to buy a product like mine, which kind of sounds dumb when I say it because most of them hadn't. And like, if I asked them, have you ever had a CFO before? They would clearly say no. So I realized, well, if they haven't bought someone like me before, why am I acting like they have? They don't know what features are important. They don't know what their options are. They don't know the questions to be asking. So rather than kind of shying away from the reality that I have competition and my customers have options, I started tackling it head on. And so I said, listen, like you're going to have options. You're probably talking to other people. I've actually saved you some work here because I've categorized your options into these three categories. You can have this one, or this one. Like everyone you talk to in the CFO space is going to fit into one of these categories. Here's the pros and cons of each. This is why this would be good. This is why that would be bad. And I've been in your shoes as a founder. I know what it's like to be dealing with the sort of finance and money problems that you're going through now. That's why I think this is important to you. And that's why I think you should be thinking about it this way. Oh, and by the way, the not logical conclusion here is that you should be working with me. And so I kind of, completely changed how I thought about sales. In the couple of months after I made that pivot, like my conversion rates went from 5% to nearly 80%. And I was like, closing almost everyone I spoke to. They've come down a bit since then, but certainly, there are multiple today of where I began.
It's amazing. The sales pitch is a great book. And exactly what you're saying makes me go back to what's your toilet story. Is exactly what I think you were trying to do. And if anybody hasn't read it, actually, I've had the fortunate ability to work with April early in my career with Vidyard, and then one of the companies that I helped the founder on, David, with Level Jump. It's actually in that book, Level Jump Software.
Oh wow!
So,
Okay, cool.
yeah, so it's very cool, and I had to read it to see what the story was. But either way, there's a really good clue there, and I like how you called that out because if you haven't read the book, I'll kind of give it away. If you've ever tried to buy a toilet, what's the difference? What are the differences of the toilets, and how do you know which one to buy? And so it sounds like you took that advice and applied it to what you're trying to do and said, hey, here's what I bring to the table that's going to be different from others. Because you're right. I've never worked with a CFO, Nate. I don't even know what I should be asking you. So by taking that, again, I'm tying it to Mark Robert's. What Mark did is he reverse engineered the entire sales process. And what it sounds like is you took the advice from April on the, defining that thing, but then reverse engineering to say, hey, by the way, working with a CFO, here's all the things that we do, and here's all the stuff that you're going to need. Oh, and by the way, here's all the questions you should be asking. Just work with me. You don't need to work with anybody else. Is kind of what I'm anticipating that document look like.
Yeah, that's the general gist of it. One piece I would just add on there is that my target customer is getting 200 or 300 unsolicited inbound messages, emails, DMs a week. I know that because I used to be my target customer, and I know what it feels like to have all this, unsolicited spam just landing in your inbox. And they need, they're spread thin, right? They don't have time to research anything and do the due diligence on any major decision that they have to make. So a big part of this is just making them feel like they're making an educated decision. And if you understand your industry and you understand the sort of questions that your customers experiencing, and I did because I've been in their shoes, then it wasn't too hard to kind of piece that together and make them feel like they had done their due diligence. And oh, by the way, I just summarized the fractional CFO landscape for you in 2 slides in 5 minutes. I've just saved you 3 hours of work. So yeah.
It's a piece of value that they walk out of it with, which is all. Now, the other thing you talked about earlier on that I'd like to not or step over, kind of miss. You started to build the fractional, but then you also said you more specifically niched into it to say, I specifically work with e-com and CPG companies. How did you evolve into that very much from like, oh, I'm a fractional CFO, I can work with anybody. But then you said, no, you know what? I don't want that. I'm better suited here. How did you make that determination?
For me, it was pretty simple. It was a space I'd operated in as a founder. So, I mean, my own e-com business was, not dissimilar to a lot of the companies that I'm now working with. So, I understood the technology, I understood the softwares, I understood, the lenders that they deal with. Like I just know the landscape. And for me, I guess it was one less thing I had to learn. Like I didn't have to study the industry. I'd already been studying it for 7 years. So there's that. And I think I guess as a follow-on question you could ask is why did I choose not to change and maybe pick a different industry? And I'll be honest, there are more lucrative industries I could have picked, right? I'd probably have much higher retainers if I was targeting 8-figure SaaS businesses that had, raised a Series A or Series B, for example. Like that would probably be more lucrative for me personally. But I like the fact that I could talk about this space authentically. And I think having lived the life of a CEO founder meant that I can have a lot of empathy for the sorts of problems that they're dealing with. And that just makes it, fun and easy for me because I can connect with founders very easily. Like I know what it's like to be stressed about payroll. I know what it's like to be worried about how you're going to finance the next purchase order or not know what cash flow is going to look like in a couple of months. I know that because I've lived it. I've been there. And you know what? I've also figured out how to solve it. Let me show you this tools. It's not that hard. I can help you do it. We can do it together. So yeah, that for me was a pretty easy, direction to pick.
But I think it's also great that you did it for the reason that not everybody is suited for certain stages of companies, right? And so it sounds like you like to work with those. It sounds like you like to work with the scale up. I'll call it scale up for sake of conversation. Maybe it's not startup, but it's scale up. Once you get to scale up, is maybe that's where you need somebody like you. But I have to think that there's some level of excitement in that scale up, or that motion is where you really get excited on.
I do. I mean, part of what drew me to the fractional model was diversity. I like solving diverse, interesting problems. And every day I'm talking to a different founder who's got a different problem. And not only that, or I guess taking that a step further, I also like that the businesses I'm working with are solving, very, very different and diverse problems. This isn't like, we've got an optimized ad buying engine and we know precisely what our return on ad spend and lifetime gross profit and all these sorts of things look like. No, we're not there yet. We're still figuring that out. And so we're doing all of these different experiments and figuring out how to prioritize investing our scarce time, capital, attention, human resources, because we've got a lot of things that we could explore here. And what we need to do is figure out what are the right growth experiments to run, where is the best places for us to invest our time and energy, and how do we actually put the building blocks together to kind of build a real company here. I guess, and again, like linking back to my experience as a CEO and founder, I've been across every department, right? I've done HR, I've done accounting, I've done operations, I've done marketing, I've done finance. Like I know a little bit about all of these different areas. And so when founders are struggling with decisions across multiple disciplines or domains, like I get it. And I like solving those diverse problems. So yeah, I think fractional is interesting because of the diversity of businesses, but early stage is interesting to me because of the diversity of problems that we're dealing with.
So as I take away from, and I just looked at the time and realized we're gonna run out of time if I don't ask this. But what I do like that I heard from you, and maybe I'm wrong, is you stepped into the fractional world because you found that you enjoy working with a certain type of people. So you went into said, I'm not just a fractional CFO, I'm a fractional. You picked a role, so CFO. Then you also said, I'm going to pick a segment or a stage, which is the scale up. And then you also picked a niche and you said, I'm going to be for consumer packaged goods and e-commerce. So you all of a sudden said, look, here it is. So now that role or what you're trying to do becomes very specific, but you also come from a skill set and a knowledge to say, look, here's how my background ties into exactly where you are,
Mhm.
and I'm ready to go. Plus, any of the content or any of the things that I'm sure that you asked about, you speak from a level of authority. And I don't mean it in a negative way, but you more of an expertise, maybe expertise versus authority, because you've
Mhm.
lived it, you've been there, you can experience it. And clearly, listening to you talk, you get really
Mhm.
excited about working with these founders and helping them solve the
Mhm.
problems and moving them just a little bit forward.
Mm. Yeah, I do. I do. For me, it's a huge help that I believe. Well, firstly, I believe that entrepreneurship and founding a business is one of the hardest jobs in the world. Um, and I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for people who are not only bold enough to recognize that some part of their status quo or their world isn't working, but they're also brave enough to have a go at fixing it. It's like,
Mm,
we don't like the food system, or we don't like the way that this works, or we don't like our options of products or choices in this category. I'm actually going to have a go at building a better option. Damn it. So off I go. And to me, these are the people who are trying to make the world better for everyone. They're saying the status quo sucks. I want a better version of it, and I'm going to try to build it. And they're the ones who are moving society forwards. They're the ones who are leaving legacy models, legacy products, legacy ways of doing things behind and trying to build better future versions.
mm.
And I want to be able to support them because I think we have a lot of work to do. We need a lot of better versions of a lot of things. And I get a buzz out of being able to support people who are on that sort of mission or path.
It's awesome. I had somebody tell me once, not too long ago, they said, I will only invest in somebody if they've actually sat in the shoes, they've experienced a problem, and they built a thing out of a problem statement that they were facing. If
Hmm.
those are the people I will invest in because they understand the pain and they're not just looking at it from oh, that's a great idea that I can tap into. It's like, no,
Mm.
I wanna make something better because I experienced this pain point and it
Hmm.
frustrated me. So, it was
Mm.
an interesting way of thinking about it, but it also sounds very similar to what you just said. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's cool. Before we run out of time, Nate, as we get to moving to the wrap-up phase here, I always like to ask everybody likes new and likes different, and if you do both at the same time, it can either cause friction or uncertainty. So for somebody thinking about, starting their own consultancy or fractional business, what are 2 or 3 actionable things that you would tell them to consider before they jump off that cliff, like you said, for the parachute to expand?
Mm. Yeah, my sister-in-law was actually going through this a little while ago. She was, moving out of the corporate world, thinking about launching her own coaching business, and she was getting hung up on websites and email addresses, and the need for this, that, and everything else. I was like, no, forget it. You don't need any of that nonsense. Just get your contact list. The 20, 30, 50 people that you know best. Some people that like, trust, and respect you from your time working in corporate, wherever, and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing. I'm thinking about solving this problem for this sort of person. Was wondering if you might know anyone that you could put me in touch with who could use this solution. And just start having conversations with people who have the sort of problem that you want to solve.
That is incredible advice, and it's funny, there's a lot of times where starting at a new company, I suggest that to account executives or people in the team. Say, go back to the people you've worked with, ask them about, say, hey, I'm in this new role, I'm learning a new thing, I held you at high regard. Can you give me a little bit of time?
Hmm.
It's amazing what you learn from them. As long as you
Hmm.
ask the question, you come from a place of good. So, um,
Yeah.
anyways, we're gonna run out of time, Nate. But this has been a lot of fun. If somebody wanted to pick up the conversation, talk to you a little bit more, where would you advise them to try to find you?
Yeah, two best spots are my website, which is futurereadycfo.com. You'll learn more about the various services and bits and pieces that I have on the website. Or you could look at my LinkedIn. My name again is Nate Littlewood, and I'm posting on LinkedIn most days. Pretty easy to find. So yeah, that's the best social channel to find me on.
And you've also got a podcast, and that one again is called
Profits on Purpose.
Profits on Purpose. So
Yeah.
I obviously I have one that I need to look into now, especially about the CEO conversation, which sounds like it'll be a good one.
The episode is with Mackie Swan. It was 20 something, mid 20, 24 or 26. I can't, one of them, I think.
Okay. Well, awesome.
Cool.
Nate, that's going to wrap up another episode of the Revenue Problem Solvers. I want to thank you for sharing these incredibly invaluable insights today. There's some strategy you can put into action on Monday. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl with the Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn your obstacles into opportunities. Thank you for investing your time with us today. We'll see you on the next episode.